Welcome to USCIRF Spotlight, a new series by the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, where we discuss major topics and issues in the news and explore how those issues are impacting religious freedom around the globe. Here is USCIRF Director of Outreach and Policy, Dwight Bashir, leading this week's discussion.
Welcome to USCIRF Spotlight. Today we're going to talk about some of the most pressing religious freedom concerns that exist around the world and learn about some of the new multilateral entities that have been created in recent years to collectively address these challenges. We're also going to hear some thoughts on what should be the top priority issues for the new Biden administration that they should consider as it formulates its broader human rights and international religious freedom policy. To discuss these issues and more, we're fortunate to have Knox Thames with us, who is currently a senior fellow at the Institute for Global Engagement and a visiting expert at the United States Institute of Peace. Welcome, Knox.
It's great to be here, Dwight. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. And Knox worked for 5 years at the State Department until just last summer as the special advisor for religious minorities, and both during the Obama and Trump administrations. And before that, we actually served together for several years at USCIRF before he left for state in 2015. So Knox, from your perch at the State Department, and now that you've been out of government for about 6 months, you've still been following religious freedom issues globally. What do you see as some of the biggest challenges around the world that a new administration should be addressing in the year ahead?
Well, that's a great question, and I really appreciate USCIRF continuing to play this important role of trying to look over the horizon about the next challenges coming up concerning religious freedom. And thinking about this question, I came up with 5 topics that I hope the new administration will focus on in a serious and significant way. The first challenge to religious freedom is China. It's its own category with what's happening to Uyghurs, Tibetans, independent Christians, Falun Gong, and also the way that they're flexing their muscles internationally. That's going to be a challenge for religious freedom promotion and human rights defense globally. Second challenge will be mass atrocities. That involves the recent designation of genocide that Secretary Pompeo made before leaving, and now Secretary Blinken has endorsed. What the Chinese government is doing there is genocidal towards the Uyghurs, but then nearby in Burma, Myanmar, the army's treatment of Rohingya Muslims is also something that I believe has reached genocidal levels, and we should call it as such. The third issue is terrorism, ISIS in Iraq, Syria, also places like Afghanistan, targeting Muslims, Christians, and other groups like the Yazidis, and then Boko Haram in Nigeria. The fourth topic would be good old-fashioned state repression, authoritarianism in countries like Saudi Arabia, Eritrea, North Korea, Iran. And then the last category I think will be the toughest. It's what do you do when democracies start becoming problematic environments for religious minorities? And here I'm thinking India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka, where there's been this tilt towards extremism, a shrinking of minority protections that's resulting in serious religious freedom violations. That's going to be a tough one because governments are responding to voters. And so it's going to take new strategies and approaches to see success there.
You know, you touch on a number of countries, obviously, that we recommend as countries of particular concern and on the special watch list that you're well aware of. You work specifically on the Middle East and South and Central Asia in your position, focusing on religious minorities when you were at State. Can you tell us where you saw some of the most positive developments during your time and in recent years? Because, you know, one of the important things is obviously we want to call out the violations in the areas that you're talking about and that I think USCIRF has reported on for years. But where have you seen some of the positive developments in this part of the world? And then, you know, also on the other side of that, are there a couple of countries where you've even seen more backsliding as well?
Yeah, great question. For myself, 2 countries I was involved in that have up arrows, positive trend lines, Uzbekistan and Sudan. And both of those were CPC countries. Both of those have been completely delisted. We saw through aggressive use of the CPC designation, it created leverage, diplomatic leverage, where we could encourage these countries to reform, to change their laws, to let people out of jail, to allow greater religious freedom and practice. So they're success stories. It's an example of U.S. engagement through the structure that IRFA created, creating the results that we all want to see around the world. The down arrows, I think India, big concern about how the Modi government's tilting away from the secular foundations of India's constitution and structure, attacks on Muslims, problems Christians are facing and others. Nepal nearby is also seeming to catch the same cold from nearby India with a anti-conversion law passed in the last couple of years. Then Algeria, big down arrow there with the treatment of groups like Ahmadi Muslims and converts into Christianity. And those are places where I think U.S. involvement can help push these countries back into the positive category where they used to be, but it's going to take work and dedicated effort.
So yeah, it sounds like some similar areas. We had put Algeria for the first time last year on our special watch list you mentioned. And as you know, I mean, the U.S. has been engaging with a number of these countries, urging some reforms, urging progress. But during your time at State over the 5-year period, there were a number of several new multilateral entities that were created, because I think some of what people argue is that, well, the U.S. can play a role, but shouldn't be the primary actor in pushing these issues. But others say, if not the U.S., then who? Because ultimately, the U.S. needs to be there for its own values for that reason, but also it's the morally right thing to do and in our national security interest. But can you tell me a little bit about some of these newer entities that you were involved with, and such as the Informal International Contact Group for Freedom of Religion or Belief? During your tenure, the ministerial started under Secretary Pompeo starting in 2018, the first 2 here in the U.S. and then last year in Poland. But then also the newest created International Religious Freedom or Belief Alliance, that has over 30 countries now participating. Could you tell us about these, and then tell us how these entities potentially could create more of this collective approach to trying to put pressure on governments to improve their records?
Yeah. While we're seeing, from the Pew Forum, the statistics continue to be bad. Close to 2/3 of the global community live in countries with high or very high restrictions from government or societal actors. So that's a problematic storyline. That's the reality. It's grim, but at the same time, we should be encouraged because we're seeing new networks of governments, parliamentarians, and civil society actors coming together to fight for religious freedom for everybody. And this is a first in human history where we're seeing these forces starting to be marshaled to push back against persecution. So it really started at USCIRF with the creation of the International Panel of Parliamentarians for Freedom of Religion or Belief, which I was involved in, and yourself and others, and launching to bring parliamentarians together from different political persuasions, religious beliefs, different regions around religious freedom for all. And then thanks to our friends up in Canada, they started a network of governments. And when I joined the State Department, they invited the United States to co-chair this International Contact Group for Freedom of Religion or Belief. And the ICG created a space where like-minded governments could come together to share information, talk about best practices, and find ways to act as one and to use a collective voice. So we saw the ICG have impact in places like Pakistan, Yemen, using our collective voice to advocate for this right. And then, really thanks to Ambassador Brownback challenging us diplomats to find new ways to elevate this effort. The ministerial process brought together over 100 governments and 1,000 members of civil society at the last one that was held in Washington. A remarkable event, the biggest event ever in State Department history, all around this idea of how do we promote religious freedom. And then the alliance created that inner circle of the most committed countries that fully endorse Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So freedom to have any faith or none, change faith, meet together for worship, and then trying to bring those countries together at a political level, where the ICG had been more at a expert level. The International Freedom of Religion or Belief Alliance was coming at a political level to really take that political energy that was found in different capitals, send it downrange, and try to improve conditions around the world. I was asked to try to build it together. It was a big challenge, but I was really pleased with the diversity that we had. Now, we couldn't invite everybody because not every country that came to the ministerial completely supports the Article 18 definition of religious freedom. So that left some on the side, particularly from the Arab world. But we still had a lot of diversity: Christian countries, Muslim countries, Israel, the Jewish country, other non-Muslim countries from the global north, global south. And then we're looking for ways to advocate for the persecuted.
So I just going a little further on this newer alliance. It's almost a year old, and now, as you said, over 30 countries trying to get like-minded groups. What are some of the things that it can do collectively? So you talk about the contact group having some pressure successfully on Pakistan and Yemen to have a voice, write some letters. Are there additional tools? Because we're talking about, the diplomats here, either this, special envoys or ambassadors and so on. Are there some added tools that this newer entity has, say that the contact group is an informal type network, can use? Is it just the bully pulpit, speak their voice, or is there a chance here for those who have better relations, say with, some countries that are having, having a tough time with religious freedom or repressing, where you say state repression? Are there ways to do that both publicly and privately that kind of entity can make some progress rather than just just speaking out, naming and shaming type thing?
Yeah. Certainly naming and shaming was one of the tools in the toolbox, and it's still a powerful one. But when you're confronting a country like China that's strong, increasingly a player on the global stage, we have to find other ways. And so this is where building this alliance of diverse countries to elevate these issues, we're hoping can convince repressive countries to change their ways through speaking out, but then also using the diverse membership to find new avenues to have impact. So like Brazil is a very active member in the alliance. They have relationships with countries like Iran that the United States clearly does not have. And so we spoke with the Brazilians about how can we support your work, your interest in this topic, and use your relationships with Tehran to advocate for Baha'is, for Christians, for Sunni Muslims or other Muslims that have found themselves in jail. They were open to it. And it was a great marriage of the expertise that the United States has with the relationships of alliance members to try to find innovative entrepreneurial approaches to move the needle in a positive way. It's just over a year old, so it's still finding its legs. I think this is, in a certain sense, unprecedented to have countries meet at a political level to talk about these things. So I'm hopeful that the Biden administration will really pick up this alliance and run with it. We've heard how President Biden wants to bring a multilateral approach to diplomacy. He's reentering these different agreements and networks. And here's a network that's brand new that will align with their approach to foreign policy. So I'm hopeful that they'll adopt it, energize it, and once an ambassador at large is in place, really push it forward.
And it's a good segue into our next question, really, because you mentioned the new administration that's come in, and you recently wrote in Foreign Policy magazine that the persecution of Muslims should be at the top of the Biden administration's agenda. You touched on, one of the premier concerns that USCIRF has had on Uyghur situation back in June. We highlighted that it likely met the genocide criteria, and then we very much welcomed the determination of the outgoing Trump administration. But could you tell us a little bit more? I mean, obviously the Rohingya and others in the Middle East, the majority that get targeted are Muslims. But can you tell us a little bit more about that conclusion you had? And then of course, give us some of your top ideas here for the new administration as it's formulating its broader human rights and specifically international religious freedom policy. You mentioned some priorities earlier in our discussion, but what would you think should be at the top of that agenda?
Yeah. Their approach to this work needs to be religious freedom for everybody, freedom of religion or belief, have any faith or none, freedom to change faith, finding ways that the United States can advocate for the rights of conscience, that people can seek truth as their conscience leads them. But in that broad approach and focus on the right, they need to be specific in advocacy. So if Muslims are being persecuted, they should talk about it. If Christians are being persecuted, they should talk about it. Baha'is, Yazidis, atheists, Hindus, whomever, that have that specific approach to groups that are suffering because of the beliefs that they hold or don't hold. The article in Foreign Policy that you mentioned about Muslim persecution, as I try to reflect on the global environment for Muslims and their ability to just simply live out their beliefs as their conscience leads, is very constrained. And you start with China and Burma committing genocides against people because they are Muslims. Yes, there are other elements involved, land, ethnicity, but you take away the faith part, and I think you'd have a very different situation. And so hundreds of thousands of people are suffering because of their faith and facing death because of they're Muslims. India was the next country where it's the third largest Muslim country in the world. And this shiftward towards Hindu extremism has resulted in lynchings and mob attacks on Muslims with no police protection or very little. And its new laws could also even disenfranchise Indian Muslims of their citizenship, again, because they're Muslim. And then you look further into Muslim majority countries, there's no freedom of conscience there either. If you are okay with the state imposed form of Islam, you're fine. But if you want to innovate, if you want to change denominations or even walk away from the faith, there will be a world of hurt coming down on you from the government. So my finding was Muslims face greater governmental persecution than any other faith community in the world. And it's ignored. There's no discussion about it. We talk about it in country-specific contexts, but as a theme, this is something that I hope will be picked up. But I also said, look, this is not to favor one group over others. We need to be advocating for everybody. We just don't want to leave any groups behind. So, I'm hoping that the Biden administration will be very specific in their advocacy. I was very encouraged that Secretary Blinken was named and confirmed. I worked with him a little bit when I was in the Obama administration. He cares about these issues. It resonates with him. You heard him talk about how his father-in-law or his stepfather was a Holocaust survivor, so he gets it. So there's going to be a friend on the 7th floor for these issues who I think, when given the chance, will speak out. And so I think it's incumbent upon them, though, that they find a great ambassador at large, someone who comes in ready to hit the ground running, who knows the field, who knows the groups, and can be that advocate for the United States and on this issue around the world.
Well, we'll have to leave it right here, Knox. Very insightful. Thanks for your reflections and your experiences, putting things in perspective. A lot of interesting insights. And you can find Knox's work at the Institute for Global Engagement's website, as well as at USIP, the United States Institute of Peace. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on USCIRF Spotlight.